Hey everybody, it's Saul. Welcome back to Skookum Scarp Sanctuary. Hopefully you watched our intro video to Sasquatch and Wildfoods. But now I wanted to give you a quick rundown of where we're going here, where we're going to start our little trip into the woods. I'm basically at the interface here between our upper lot and down into the woods, into the upland woods. This right here are various rubus species. We've got elderberry back there as well. But this is pretty typical of what you see in the way that forests are. They kind of start off with this hard edge right here of really prickly berries that all have various edible parts at different times of the year. But what I'm walking down to here is essentially an old logging road that we've converted into a trail. You can see all the bleeding heart coming up here. That's a nice spring flower that's eventually gonna pop up real nice. But walk down through here, you can see all the ferns, and then one of the first things we come to right here is salmonberry. Now, salmonberry is very important to native tribes. Right here we can see some of the first flowers of the year. So these flowers, these purple flowers that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, are edible. The leaves are edible as well. They were used by Native Americans and also used for medicinal purposes as a pain reliever, stomach issues. But the main things, of course, are probably the berries, the flowers, and then the shoots. So down here we can see some of the young shoots coming up for the year. Those were consumed by Native Americans as well. So we have multiple parts here on this one shrub that we know are edible and or medicinal. This area in here is an area that, like many of our locations here in our acreage, we're managing essentially for restoration. My background is in environmental geology, riparian restoration, but because I also come from a farming state, my family were farmers, I also think about edibles, berries, and things like that. So essentially, the way that I manage these woods, for instance, right here we can see, okay, we've got these young evergreens. So we're allowing the evergreens to come back because those have uses for Sasquatch as far as hiding and potentially food sources. But we believe that evergreens are important habitat. Large evergreens are important for Sasquatch habitat. One of the issues in here is you have these alder trees, and they're predominantly supposed to be a riparian species, but they kind of overtake the uplands. They kill all the evergreens, and they basically just create fire zones in here. And that's kind of a lot of the issues that we have in the West. So we selectively thin out the alder trees, which allows these nice little evergreens to start greening up again, and they come back to life actually pretty quickly once you start thinning out the alder. But then the other trees that we're selecting for, like over in this area, we've got cascara, which has berries, as well as wild cherry trees are in there as well. In fact, this one right here, this is a wild cherry tree. And those things will put on just insane amounts of cherries, and they get really tall. So you can imagine a Sasquatch walking by. If they've got the stomachs that can tolerate it, then they're consuming them. But all in here, you can see where I'm slowly but surely thinning it out to get those evergreens to pop back up, to get these berry trees that have multiple parts to pop back up. And so these are all food and habitat choices that we're making in order to help the Sasquatch. And this is one of our evergreens that's gonna get nice and big in the future. But one of the things that I do is I take off the limbs and kind of leave them. I got to get these piled up a little bit more, but kind of basically where the tree was, I try to leave some of these limbs so that it kind of protects against erosion. Because a lot of these trees, that's the other issue as far as land management for people, is that we don't want a lot of runoff going down into our streams for various ecological reasons. Salmon being probably the biggest in the Pacific Northwest. But let's just go down here to where we can get to one of these nice big stands over here. So this is like a really good example of what we're doing. You can see all the nice green salmonberry bushes coming up there. And we've got this evergreen. It's getting pretty good size at this point right here. Then we go over here to this old stump. And this is one of the primary food sources of Sasquatch in our area. And this is red huckleberry. Now you can see here that they love to grow on the old stumps. And in fact, we know that local Native American tribes tended basically huckleberry gardens up here. And since we know that this particular area here was inhabited by Chinook people, we can make an assumption probably pretty solidly that Sasquatch culturally have been coming down here for red huckleberry gardens since, probably several thousand years. And so part of our strategy is, as we remove these alders and thin it out a little bit, because the alders and the way that it gets, you can see like down through here, like how brown all that is. And then, as we kind of thin stuff out, you can see it starts to kind of green up a little bit more. And so this is important, obviously, for Sasquatch. So just look through here, this whole thicket. The way that they like to consume these is they get really tall. First off, they don't get super tall in and of themselves, but when they are on these very large stumps, they're actually right up where the Sasquatch, they walk by, and we've observed this, where something comes by and they eat the leaves and the berries. And so it's kind of like almost like a popsicle to them. As they're walking by through the woods, they can just grab the tips of these and they can go run it across it with their teeth and have themselves a nice little lunch. So, but yeah, so these are just some of the spring sources. One of the other main ones that we've got down in here, let's see if we can find one. This is one, actually. This one I use in a very similar way. I always like to pick huckleberries when the berries come out along this trail. I love just having berries down in my face that I can grab as I walk along. So I totally get where the Sasquatch is coming from. Yeah, so this one up in here, this is a big leaf maple. And when this one starts putting on flowers, that whole thing is going to be nothing but edible flowers. And then we see underneath it, we've got the salmonberry and huckleberry bushes still coming through. So, and then the other thing that kind of helps this situation is it's a pretty steep slope all down through here. We don't go down there. So what you're looking down into here is essentially Sasquatch zone. That at this point we don't do any work down in that area. We tend to mostly kind of be working along the trails in the same areas, but and you can see this one too. This is a beautiful one. That big huge stump, and you got all these huckleberries growing way up in there. This is exactly the sort of food sources that they love. And when we've got the trails in here, it makes it a little bit easier for them to get down through here without too much of a hassle. So yeah, that's just kind of an intro. I'm not an expert forager. I would say I'm above average. As a land manager, I've learned, like I say, my background is in environmental geology, but part of that is having a really good understanding of how our land management and our practices interact with the natural environment and what choices that we make. You can see in here, this is what the red huckleberry love. You can see how this one's coming up even off the bottom of that stump. So that's kind of our thing out here. is really being the first preserve that's really focused specifically on Sasquatch habitat and food sources. We've got a lot of other areas where we're doing similar work, including in the riparian areas, but this was just kind of a quick one. I'll be doing videos that reflect different seasonalities going through here, but this is kind of just the first spring one. So in the prior video I was having the discussion about them having to follow these rivers of food. Well, these are the rivers of food. All right, well, thanks for tuning in.